Good morning, everyone. This is our final lecture for winter quarter for the lecture series. I'm Shah Osha. We have today the pleasure of Dan Webb, who's teaching in the woodworking studio, teaching woodworking. So he's here at Evergreen. And stay tuned for next quarter for who's coming in the spring. And we have Logan Burke to introduce Dan. So thanks, Logan.
Hi there, I'm Logan. I'm a part of the Monsters program, as you can tell by my hat. I'm here to introduce Dan Webb, a highly accomplished wood sculptor, general artist, and I found my research an interesting blogger. Check out Dan's website for some interesting writing on how sculpture crumbles the very idea of genre and the connection between the invention of bicycles and butt sex. Dan is apparently one of our illustrious faculty here at Evergreen. I wouldn't know, as doing sculpture work makes me want to tear out my hair and beg each of my exes to take me back. But Dan's work really resonates. I took a look at his works that feature human shapes carved into and emerging from ordinary lumber. I had some inane collegiate thought about organic form emerging from inorganic shapes, but how absurd of me to call wood inorganic. The tree didn't choose to die and get cut into a square. For my own work, I perceive myself as a cartoonist. You need a lot of humor and absurdity in order to make comics. Dan is able to wrestle with absurdity in a way that produces some absolutely true beauty. So, just to be quick, I'd like to relinquish the floor and give a warm welcome to Dan Webb.
Oh, thank you. That was a great introduction. Thanks for being here, and thanks to Shaw. So yes, some of you might recognize me from the wood shop. I work here one day a week, which is a joy and a pleasure. But I do have another job, so it's going to be great to tell you about that today. Whoops, I got to go back. Let's see if I can turn this on. So I carve things for a living, mostly out of wood, but sometimes out of stone, like you see here. I do other things as well, which I will show you along the way. But for me, really, the North Star of everything is carving. And it's a great job to have. It's an unusual job. And I get asked about it a lot. People say, how and why and what and how come and when and all this stuff. And so all those are great questions. How come and why? And so for this talk, what I thought I'd try to do is answer some of those questions as I go, and a few others along the way. So we'll see how it goes here. So the first question that I usually get asked is, what do you make? What is it that you do? And obviously carvings, right? But stylistically what I do draws from an American vernacular carving tradition, which you might know as folk art or hobo carving, and that's mixed really with a European academic kind of carving as well. So whatever I do, the results lie somewhere in the middle. And this is a really good example of that. The chain is really a vernacular carving form, and the flower is very much kind of a European. So if you are not familiar with that, this is from the American Folk Art Museum. These are walking sticks. This is a very common thing. So the chain is carved, it's all carved from one piece of wood, right? So the chain is just one piece of wood that's integral to the stick. Meanwhile, this is from Westminster Abbey. And this is not one piece of wood, by the way. This is layered. So I'll let you decide which form relies on artifice a little bit more. But one side is really rough, It's kind of the blues to me, and the other side is real polished, and that's more like chamber music or something like that. So there's really a simplicity of form to Americana carving that I love, that often hides its technical complexity. While the European tradition is generally more decorative and it tends to kind of flaunt it. So drawing on both means that I can make things that look pretty recognizable, but without really idealizing them. So humor plays a role in what I do as well, even if it's of the gallows variety. I think humor is a really important thing to employ, especially if you're talking about serious subjects. This piece is called Runner, and it's also from a single piece of wood, like the walking stick I showed you. So I plunge cut the legs out in this zigzag shape with a chainsaw, and then I articulated them at the hip and at the knee and at the ankle with a carved chain. So for those of you that need a refresher on how to carve a chain, here you go. So it is one piece of wood, right? Easy peasy. How hard could it be? Carving's been around a while, and it's incredibly adaptable. It's incredibly useful. Wherever there's stones or trees, there's a tradition of carving. There's a tradition of making things via carving. So it intersects with architecture, furniture, shipbuilding, tool making, weaponry, religious monuments, personal adornment, musical instruments, and art making, of course, among a whole lot else. So it really cuts across cultures and languages and eras. We'll talk a little bit more about how far back that goes, but to me it's really shorthand for archaeology itself. It's what you think of when you think of entire societies like Egypt or the Greeks or the Japanese or the Romans or the Aztecs or the Toltecs, the Mayans, the Inuits, the Haidas, the Tlinkits, so on and so on. It's just been with us the whole time. And even recent immigrants to this part of the world carve as well. So here's one that you might recognize or you might have seen, I don't know. It's 19 feet tall from head to foot, and it was made from 28 pieces of interlocking Colorado marble weighing 175 tons. There's no mortar. All these pieces fit together. And this is carved by 7 immigrant brothers, the Piccirilli brothers, who carved this in their studio in the Bronx, New York. They carved a lot of interesting things. They carved the frieze above the stock exchange building on Wall Street. They carved the lions on 42nd Street in front of the library there. They're really good, and a lot of what they did to me, are sort of indelible images of those cities. So there's this gravitas that comes along with chipping on stones if you're good at it. So here's Lincoln listening along to Martin Luther King doing his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. And really the reason that speech was there was because of the grand staircase, because of the columns, because of the power of Lincoln sitting behind the speaker in that chair. So carving plays a real interesting role in that. So carving goes highbrow for sure, and it definitely can go lowbrow too. It's all the brows, and I really appreciate this. A friend of mine bought this in a junk shop for me, and I used it as inspiration for this piece. So my work really follows in a similar path. There's definitely highbrow and lowbrow and all versions in between into what I do. And if you imagine in this gnome's face that I borrowed from Lincoln's face to make it, you were absolutely correct. So I was commissioned to make this piece in front of a water treatment plant in Bellevue, and the architecture for this wastewater treatment plant was, imagine a mock Tudor house except bigger, outsized, and it's in this very bucolic neighborhood. So I really felt like I would make a lawn gnome except bigger and outsized, and to take that lawn gnome incredibly seriously, and then to plumb the sky and us and the mushrooms using the pipes from the plant that this stands in front of. So I just want to say yes to all of it. I feel really lucky to be working in a genre where there's so many entrances to interpreting things through carving. It's furniture, and it's architectural details, it's art, it's lots of different things that are utilitarian. So I just want to say yes in as many ways as possible, and that for right now that means quite literally. So I started making these yeses during the pandemic and posting them on Instagram, which I'm trying not to hate. I'm trying to lean in on that. So all of these are for sale. They're the size of my palm. And the caveat was that any potential buyer would have to negotiate with me about the price, and then negotiate about where we would meet in the middle of our two starting points. It's called 100 Ways to Get to Yes. I'm going to carve 100 of these things and hopefully sell 100 of them to various people. I've carved 17 of them so far, and I just had really incredible interactions with everyone. They're really sort of memorable and great. So if anybody needs some yes in their life after this, talk to me. We'll hook you up. But returning to that idea of carving really inhabits a lot of different places. It really kind of breaks down the idea of genre in the first place. So is this a chair or a sculpture, really? So I made these chairs out of just crap wood from Home Depot rather than the wood that an actual furniture maker would use for this. So just knotty pine. It looks like a school desk, but the fragility of it and the bubble gum stuck underneath it, which is real, it was 500 pieces of bubble gum under there, just makes it really unusable. So it becomes a contemplative object rather than a utilitarian one. So that seemingly puts it in the category of sculpture. But on the other hand, this is a sculpture that encourages people to sit on it, which they definitely did in the show that I had. It was pieces made with the idea that they were not precious, that you could touch them, you could be on them. So people have questions about that. They say to me, are you an artist or are you a craftsman? And I say yes. I just say yes. So rather than an either or distinction, it's just really more interesting to take advantage of the fact that, carving and making stuff allows me to be part of so many different kinds of conversations. I just get to ask, what's the most interesting thing, right? What am I not seeing that I wish I was? And there is luckily no definitive answer to that. The answer always changes, but that's kind of like carving itself, where you uncover one layer and there's another one below it, and what you don't see really informs what you do. And even when you've uncovered everything, there's a mystery that remains. These two pieces came from the same section of wood. I cut this section of redwood in half, and I carved this shrouded figure on top, and I carved this skull, which is biting down on a chain. You can pick the skull up and move it around. It's one piece of wood. Here's a plug. If you want to see this piece, it's at the Tacoma Art Museum right now. If it seems like I've thought about carving deeply definitely yes, and people have questions about that. They ask me how I learned to carve in the first place or what drew me to it. So I will tell you, it started here on the last remnant of the land bridge that linked Eurasia to the Americas, and I lived right on this island, right. St. Lawrence Island. So I lived in this island as a kid for 2 years, starting in 1975. And the native people there, about 400 or so in number, depending on the day, were subsistence hunters, just scrapping together a living in extremely unforgiving circumstances. Flying to this place, you fly and it's white, and then it looks like there's a little sprinkle of pepper on top of white, and that's the village that you land at. So they were tremendous hunters and incredibly canny in using really modest resources, but they didn't just hunt, right? They were prolific storytellers, singers, dancers, doll makers, and carvers. So finding food and creating shelter were obviously the two most important jobs they had, but right after that, and I mean right on the heels of that, they moved on to these other things that I've mentioned. So watching them dance and sing together, sew together, tell stories together, and admire one another's carvings together out of ivory most of the time, or bone, showed me that there was so much more to being alive than just staying alive, right? It's not just the struggle. It's the stories that we tell each other. So it all hinged on stuff that we would call art, though I never heard that word used there. And I never saw anyone excluded from participating in it. And reflecting on it from where I am now, it's hard to not come to the conclusion that I was really seeing the way that animals really engage their humanity in order to make a civilization. It's super important. It's a universal impulse. It's found everywhere in the world. And the sophistication of how people go about it is just staggering, especially when there's very few resources to work with. And the irony, of course, is that here where we are now, we have plenty of resources, right? Yet this culture manages to push that impulse really far away. So it's a thing where you have to describe to people that you're an artist. What does that mean? You know, what do you really do? So we have managed here to push that really far. I took a picture of this. I found it in a book because I know this is from many years ago, but I was at parties, or however you want to describe it. This was so familiar to me. I'd been in that group of people who were dressed like that playing those drums before. It kind of blew my mind. So living there didn't make me just realize that I wanted to make stuff too. It sort of gave me permission, right? And since then, I've also come to realize that most of us have that impulse. But we just need a little nudge to let it out. So I made this when I was 11 years old. And you can see how well it flew. It wasn't that good, but making it really filled me with joy. It made me filled with possibility. Like if I could do this, what else I could do. And the minute you do that, things start to occur to you. And one of them was that a tree, this extremely heavy earthbound thing rooted in the earth, had the power of flight inside of it. And that people were creative enough to see that. They could see into it. They could see the potential towards that. And that was really the power of creativity, to see past what a tree is towards what it could be. So what other surprises were out there? Whatever things could, learning to be creative, what other hurdles could you overcome with that? And all that led me to art school, where it was a joy and a pleasure to learn that creativity was even bigger and more complicated than I thought it was, which was a fantastic realization, but it's also really overwhelming. I tell my students to go to the library and find books in the art section, and the art section goes on and on and on, right? It's an overwhelming thing. So I kind of crashed. I kind of fizzed out when I was in art school, and I just had to go back to the beginning. So I made this in my last year of school, just kind of reaching back towards that airplane that I made. And the rubber band is the guts, and the propeller is the head, etc. But from there, ideas just started showing up. And I think with my hands in motion, so a lot of people say that you have to come up with an idea, and then your hands are the dumb implements on the ends of your arms that make those ideas into reality. It doesn't work that way. I start to make stuff, and then one thing leads to another, and then my brain engages about how to make that thing that just was surprising into reality, right? So as soon as I made that figure, then I started making a whole series of balsa wood objects that were really utilitarian and that just robbed of their utility. So I made tools and ladders and boxing gloves and weapons. I just didn't really have to think that hard. I just wanted to make something that was entirely useless, entirely not the thing that it came from, and just see what happened. And also play with scale. So these are about 6 feet long. This is also about 6 or so feet long. So I was going back to my own joy, and I wondered if I could go back even further, back to the beginning of making itself. And that's how I really came to really embrace the oldest, most universal practice out there, which is carving, which has been worked at and thought about and tinkered with nonstop for at least 2.5 million years ago, but that keeps getting pushed back. It's probably closer to 3. I'll just tell you about this. This is an Acheulean axe. This particular one is 1.76 million years old. There's a lot of them that are older than this, but they found a lot that have these interesting elements in it. This has a fossil of a shell right in the middle, and it's a design element, right? It was done on purpose. So it's a purely decorative element. It does not make the axe work any better. It just looks cool. And to the point where there's actually something called the sexy axe theory. This is real. About how people made these axes in order to sort of like flaunt the goods, just say it, how cool their axe making was. And I can relate to all that. I want to make it look cool too. I share that same impulse with carvers from thousands of years ago, from millions of years ago, from all over the globe. So my colleagues, they go back a minute. It's pretty great. But having that kind of history with that many geniuses involved, we are talking about profound geniuses who make this stuff, means that incredible things have already been made. So the idea of adding more to that pile can feel a little daunting. The bar is pretty high. So my own approach really starts with wanting to be a student of it, to get good at it, to get as good at it as I can, to always learn and challenge myself. So the labor and the efforts, which are baked into what it's about for me, are pretty visible, which is why it's not surprising that one of the main questions that I get asked is, how long did that take you to make that thing? And I have a really unsatisfying reply, which is that I have no idea. I really don't at all. I am not being paid by the hour to do this. I am really trying to figure out what is the way to get to awesome. That's really what I care about. And I'm really not sure what the answer to that is either. It's really TBD. There's, as I said just a minute ago, there's lots of layers. You just keep going. But I do know that for me, part of the answer involves using wood, which I started using just because it was free, right? It was just dumb luck that led me to it. I didn't set out to be a carver when I went to school. I would take any unloved, neglected, or thrown away piece destined for the wood pile or the landfill and just cut into it and see what was there. So this piece, which I have to say is in the Smithsonian now, was given to me by a furniture maker who couldn't use it because there were so many variations in it. There was spalt and there was this flamed figure on it, which made it too hard to flatten and make it into flat pieces to make into furniture. So he was gonna toss it out, and luckily I got to take it and use it. So really the waste stream has become my material of choice. This hand is from framing lumber. I'll just go through some of this. This is from a timber from a place that was torn down in Seattle. A lot of these come from structural timbers. This is another structural timber from a torn down building. This is from a garage that was torn down in Seattle. They used to make them out of enormous timbers. This is from a tree that somebody cut down and was going to cut it up for firewood. This is 42 inches tall. I carved both of my kids underneath a blanket for this one. This is one piece of wood. All of the patches that you see in there the wood was really punky, and so I had to cut them out and patch them in. So the blanket has this kind of patchwork quilt feel to it, which was just riding the serendipity. I didn't plan on that, just happened. So all these tossed out pieces of wood just have these stories, and it's hard to not relate to that. It's hard to not connect the life of the tree to our own lives. They live and die like we do. They have skin, they have limbs, they have children, they have blood. It's really hard to not see that and reflect on your own life. It's right about here that a lot of people, they don't have a question per se, but they just say, I just couldn't do what you do because I just don't have the patience to do that. And I always think that's weird because I don't have any patience either. Just wonder what they're talking about. And the secret to being a good carver and maybe a good anything is to just be present for the process. Just be into it. Just figure out a way of enjoying the process. And for me, that just really means slowing down. In the shop, I just say move at the speed of wood. So if you slow down, there's just so many moments where it's transformative and great. But if you like doing something, you'll keep doing it. It's as simple as that. If you like the challenge of it, then overcoming those challenges means that you'll keep challenging yourself. So this is an example of that. I wanted to see if I could carve sections from this giant timber articulated with chains. You see this at the shoulder. In order to extend this block outward, the goal was to see if I could change the shape of the block while keeping it in one piece. And I was able to do that. So the labor of it makes clear that we're able to expand past our own borders with enough creativity, guile, and effort. And really this ended up being about as close to a self-portrait as I think I've ever made. This is another example of that. This piece is all about the process. This is called Mr. Butterfly because the first thing I did was cut the foot shape and put it together with a butterfly joint. And the word butterfly is really this dumb. The butterfly gave me the idea of seeing the block itself as a chrysalis, hiding something transformative inside. So I plunge cut with a chainsaw out the blank that became this arm and the crutch that I reattached to itself on the other side with a wedge from the block itself. So all of the, that it looks like a little window in the top. That's where the part of the crutch was. I had to carve it too big to carve it back. So there's, there was no planning on what that interior shape was going to be. So people see this work and they say, wow, I bet you make really intense drawings before you make those complicated carvings. And the answer is yes, I do. See if you can spot any of the pieces that I've already shown you. This is me drawing. This becomes this. This one, can you see that? That's a good idea, right? That becomes that. The figure underneath this, in this cracked timber, the figure appears to be looking out of the cracks at the audience. This one becomes this. So the drawings really are just prompts, and the prompts can be really rough because I know that I'm going to improvise my way to the end. So going through and really doing extensive planning on anything just really makes that improv a lot harder. It gets in the way. So when people ask me, where do you get your ideas, which they definitely do, the answer is that I don't get them, I make them. I make the ideas. I just go to work every day, and what I do is just catch the surprises that come my way and respond to them. So what does that mean? I'll go to my shop, I'll be sipping my coffee, and I'll see a piece of wood, and if I stack one piece of wood on top of another piece of wood, maybe I'll like that and want to keep stacking, or maybe I'll be mad about that and I'll want them to be different shapes. Or before long, I'm having a conversation with those things. Really, it's that simple. So it's better to show up to the studio with no idea at all and just find them along the way. If I'm not surprised, then the audience isn't surprised. And I think that sense of surprise is really important. So it's not a straight line. I want to say yes to things, but getting to yes is really not easy, right? It might be joyful on occasion, full of positivity and promise. But yes can also be really complicated. It can be less than that. It can be said with resignation, with coercion, or maybe even with no other options left, right? Yes is multifaceted. Because of that complexity, saying yes doesn't really describe a static moment to me, but really a teetering one before action with unknown consequences takes place. It's really this liminal place when you say yes. And we're really bound to operate within structures that challenge us, that bind us, that stifle us a lot of times. Some of them you know about. They're cultural, financial, familial, physical, chemical. but finding our own agency within that is really key. And then supercharging that agency with creativity is really the next step. So one way to do that is to say yes and, to really posit alternative, to imagine options. And to me, imagination is really the handmaiden to creativity. And really, luckily, you're in a place that values that. When I give talks, I'm not often in places that value that, but I am here. I know that from teaching here for a little minute. So here in this room, this group of people, this college, that's a value. So no matter what you're studying here, I don't know what you all are studying. I'm going to bet that the subtext is really all the same, which is to be a flexible thinker. It's really what you're here to do. That's your job. And if you learn that, it's really the most powerful and dangerous skill there is. So go to creativity school every day. You can do it. So I'm going to leave you with this. It wasn't that long ago that I was in a stranger's shop looking at a bandsaw that he had for sale. And he asked me what I was going to do with it and what I did for a living. And it was something about this guy. Maybe do something that I don't normally do, which is tell him a version what I just told you. Just go for it. Just explain myself without being kind of evasive or glib. So I did that. And then after I was done, he kind of looked off into space. He just kind of saw his own thoughts out there. And he stayed there for a minute or two. And when he finally came back, he just asked me one question. He said, "So you don't carve bears with a chainsaw?" And I thought about it. And the answer is not yet. But that's a pretty good idea, actually. And so I just feel like I'm really at the starting point for what it actually is that I do. And I just want to keep moving forward and keep saying yes. So I thank you for listening to me. Questions, comments? Stunned silence? Peaceful sleepers? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm personally, I'm a poet.
Great.
And so I find myself gravitating a lot towards your multifaceted take on the word yes, and how we can end up there in multiple ways. This is more of a comment than a question. And I find it very, it's inspiring in a lot of ways to think about how words are able to, the road that you take to get to a word such as yes, no, whatever answer you want to give. I think that there are so many paths and sidetracks you can go down, and I love just this idea that yes can and more word can be so experimental, so influential, despite sometimes being simple in our minds.
Here to that, for sure. Oh, yes, right there. Yes, yeah.
So when you're doing a project that's of a very large scale and you're planning on using one piece of wood, like say you're doing chains or something, and you do like, I don't know, near the end of the process or something, break something or I don't know, slip up. What's your take on like cheating when it comes to like using like mortar or another piece of wood? Is it like a personal ethics thing, or do you feel like your investment in a piece like will let you kind of like make different decisions along the way in the process?
I'm trying to put that into a real world scenario where where there was a catastrophic thing that happened that oh geez. Do I feel it's cheating to glue pieces of wood back together?
Yeah, if your piece is like kind of like exploring what you can do within the limitations of like one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be one thing where I would want to not cheat in that circumstance. But for the most part, I would say, man, totally glue it back together. You know, there's so few times when I wouldn't advocate for that. I think the superpower of wood in particular is the way that it can be additive and subtractive. So it's so easy to repair wood. You know, it's a lot harder with stone or metal. I mean, you can do it, but it's just hard. So wood is so available and so user-friendly and so able to, you know, add and subtract that, yeah, there's really no cheating almost ever in my mind. Yes?
So let's say that like you're just having an off day. You get into the studio, it's feeling weird, you're carving or your mind is just not in the right space. How do you like recenter yourself for the improv that is your creation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Did everybody hear that question? Yeah, so there's so many times when I go to the studio that I don't feel like it. And there's, my body hurts or something's happening in my life or, you know, a lot of it can be really intense. And I think that the discipline of it is really important because there's never a time. I've been doing this for a while. There's almost no time when there's not challenges. So you just learn to keep at it. And there's ways that you can just crest out of yourself and get to a place, kind of that right brain spot where you're free of that for a while. And at this point now, my studio practice is really a place of solace for me a lot of times. It's the place I want to go to now. And I train myself to do that. But yeah, there's always a reason not to do it. There's always going to be something that is hard. So rising above that, I think is, you just got to find a way to do it, you know. So however you do it, you got to do it. Doing hard things. Yes?
You say yes a lot. Is there anything that makes you feel like you won't say no?
Do I want to say no to things? I think if you were going to have difficult conversations with anybody about anything, you have to find a place where you can do that. So there's a bunch of things that spring to mind, right? You know, fuck fascism forever. But how in the world, 77 million people voted for what is happening right now. How do you figure out how to have a conversation with some of those people? And I think, yes is really complicated. And saying yes to somebody's humanity is a first step towards that. When I was a carpenter, I would sit at lunch with a bunch of people that basically didn't agree with me about anything. And I would take it on, man. We would just have these long conversations about stuff. And it really helped that we had a working relationship with each other, that I knew about their kids, that I had some context for that, which meant that they listened to me, you know? And so wanting to say no, that is a little bit reflexive. How do you say yes is way more of a discipline and way harder to do. So I'm going to try to figure out how to say yes most of the time, with the caveat that yes is a big fat bear a lot of times. So yes.
I feel that your work is, especially with all the body stuff, that it is so physical, it's so visceral, and the way that you take something that's hard, make it look like it's soft or it's dripping, and I'm wondering, so we can hear like what's led you to this work. But can you speak, because this is college, can you speak to your research, your understanding of some kind of philosophical ideas, historical ideas, art historical ideas, the contemporary art world? What are you looking at and that's feeding that isn't like, you're not making work out of those things, right? But what is your relationship to that?
Oh man, so that question is another hour-long lecture. But so when I was in school, it was sort of the dying breath of modernism, and postmodernism was really ascendant, and so understandably so. And it's a long conversation about what that even means. I immediately would have to define both of those things for you, unless everybody here really is on board with it. Okay. Well, what's the Cliff Notes on that? So modernists challenged the past with the idea that they were moving forward in a linear, rational fashion towards something. And postmodernists came along and said, there is no linear path like that. There is no solving what art is. There is no end point to that. Your version of truth or God or beauty might be different than mine. There's lots of different versions of all of that. So those, essentially, modernists were contrarians, and then the contrarians ran into a bunch of other contrarians. So what happens when two contrarians meet? You know, fireworks, right? So what I saw in school was starting to be really kind of a consensus based on this huge cloud of nobody knowing what was going on anymore. And art was really starting to be organized by curators and what Arthur Danto called the curatoriate, academics who sort of defined things through biennials and documentas and all these kinds of things. And it was really easy for me to sort of come from Alaska and to just poke holes in that. I felt like there were a lot of people that were making stuff that looked like contemporary art. And so if you just stepped out of that and did something that wasn't that, then you were sort of fulfilling the role of being the contrarian. So what I was seeing was people that were really immersed in this idea of conceptual art, which I came to understand as being pushing an idea forward and removing or disabling the hand, unless you had paid assistance to do it. Then you could go crazy. But the idea was to sort of push an idea forward and to limit the making of an object or referring to tradition in making an object. So it was really easy for me to flip that in response to that. So my interest in making stuff really was to pick up on that conversation about the kind of the death knell of a particular kind of modernism heading towards postmodernism, but postmodernism also is moving so fast that it also has its own death knell that we're experiencing right now. There's a limit to relativism. What if you really can define your own facts? What if there really are, everybody does get to have their own version of reality, And that's what postmodernism sort of posits. That's great, except what if there's climate change and we all breathe the same air and we have to actually agree on something? What then? Does postmodernism work in describing the world in that scenario? So we've sort of come through that to wherever we are now, and I think the overarching thing of modernism was to define art formally. Could it be abstract? Could it be outside in the desert? Could it be, this? Could it be that? Could it be found objects? And the overarching thing, and it could, yes to all of it. It could be all of it. But postmodernists were more interested in what it could do, what was the verb form of art. And a lot of that came down to talking about people's experience. And, there was a lot of navel gazing that was the result of that. So I think now there's something related to social sculpture that I'm more interested in, which I could also talk about for an hour. But the idea of starting outside of making a self-important object called art, but actually knowing how to do something, knowing how to have something to give to a broader society is really the first part of that. What's the act of generosity? What's the act of service? And I think that's where the energy is starting to coalesce around right now. There's so many holes in that, but have me back. Yes?
I guess I'm curious about, you were talking about your work as sort of an intersection between like artistry and craftsmanship, and I know that it sounds like your process stemmed from traditional or like cultural art, which for a long time was seen more on the craft side or more on the utilitarian side than like art that would be seen in a gallery and whatnot. So I guess I'm curious about your experience navigating gallery spaces and like the art industry in this space. I guess working to relate labor of like woodworking, and it sounds like you were also maybe a carpenter. So
I was.
So I have some experience with like the materials in a very labor-centric sense, and what that relationship of labor to material to process, and then to like getting your work seen in a gallery or getting your work into these spaces to be seen as like art objects.
That's a great question. So so the art world is not a meritocracy, first of all, and the art world really wants to see reflected back a particular story that they're talking about right now. So if you are able to pick up that thread and reflect that story back, that helps you a lot. But if you are not interested in that it's a harder sell for sure. So that's really that's my 2-sentence description of how the art world works. There's lots of ways that you can still sort of wend your way through it. I feel lucky that I exist in the art world rather than trying to make movies or make TV shows. So I think you can also make really good movies and TV shows, except it's just 100 times harder to wend your way through that with your real serious story with your soul flopped out that you really want to tell the world. You know, it's really hard to run that gauntlet and have that be an outcome. I think the way to do it as an artist is to be outside of the capitals where art happens, because it's really easy to kind of lose yourself there. And here, you know, I just get to be this romantic jackass that's really into it and doing it and going for it, because the stakes are just lower. And then when people do come through and see stuff, they go, whoa, you know, it's just kind of fully formed, you know? So I don't have to justify on the way. And I think that's really important. You just have to fight for what your vision is and what you're trying to do. And the last thing I'll say is that if you are excellent and you choose excellence, it will be seen. And I know that because I have seen that in action. And the thing is that it's just rare that people choose excellence every day. It is an exceedingly difficult thing to do. There's a difference between 99% effort and 100% effort, right? And that really matters. So just fight for what you're doing and be excellent. And the first step in being excellent is stand next to excellence. Find excellence and stand next to it. It will fume off and you will be intoxicated by it. After you are around it, it's just harder to not be around it. You want to bring it yourself. Anybody else? Yes.
This is another process question. I know that you use your sketches as like mostly inspiration, but when you're doing something with like such a large scale, specifically the fabric like drapery, I was wondering if you ever like what kind of references do you use? Is it all just up in your head? Are you able to visualize it yourself, or do you use like 3D software?
So I make a lot of models. As soon as I make a drawing and it seems like it's pretty viable, I'll make a drawing. So, I'll make a model. So for the kids under the blanket, or for the figure in the block that's looking out through the cracks, what I did for that one was I made a plywood box that was the same size as the timber, and I had a friend stand in it and do lots of different poses, and I took pictures of this person, and then I hand carved this person out of foam, and then I covered them with a blanket in a myriad of different ways. And so I carved, directly from that model is how I did that. Yes?
How did you end up on that island in the Bering Sea?
Right. So my dad was a math professor in college, and he decided that academia was really awful, and he wanted to get out of being an academic. So he loved math, but he really didn't like the the teaching part of it. So my mom and my dad, who were both kind of adventurers, they decided that they were going to get jobs through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the BIA, and the BIA sent them to this little village. So that's how it happened.
We have a question online and a second to it.
Wow, question online.
Just keep talking.
Yes?
I know that you said that you find a lot of your wood in different places, but is there like a favorite type of wood material that you've worked with in your art residency, I guess? Like or is there like an oldest one that you know of, or is there something that you kind of gravitate toward?
Yeah, that's a good question too. When I think about a favorite wood now, it's sort of like thinking about a favorite note on a piano or something. You know, they're all good. They're all useful. What I found is that in using the most unloved pieces of wood out there when I first started, that there was always something great in every single piece. So I couldn't find a loser. It's just, what I'm looking for is different than a carpenter or, you know, a furniture maker. So I'm looking for the oddball stuff. And if you're looking for that, then it's just really hard to find a bad piece of wood. They're all pretty great. There's harder and softer ones, and there's ones that are filled with more knots, and some of that presents technical challenges, but also that presents really aesthetically pleasing options too. So people say to me, usually they're like furniture makers. They're like, well, isn't madrone hard? Isn't it hard to work? Well, I was making this giant piece for the convention center, and I was telling a furniture maker that I was making it out of madrone. He said, "Why do you hate yourself?" And, you know, I just thought, so many reasons. How long do you have? But the truth is that they hate it because it chows up their tools, and it's just beautiful wood. It's incredible wood. And it just, you know, it's not a fair fight. It's steel versus wood. You know, you're going to make the thing. It just takes a little bit more time, you know. So it's all good. All the wood is good.
I have a question for you. Your practice is at once very improvisatory. You follow your hands and virtuosic. You work at a high level of skill. Can you talk about balancing spontaneity and discovery and intuition with practicing skills?
Oh, wow. Did everybody hear that? How do you balance improvisation
with the high level of skill, like how, like the excellence and the good enough maybe, or some kind of like these things can, the craft and the art, they can sometimes be a struggle, right?
Oh yeah, like every day. Yeah, so improv versus Versus skill?
Practicing skill.
Practicing skill.
I'll read it one more time. It's at once improvisatory, you follow your hands.
Okay.
It's also virtuosic. You work at a high level of skill. And you talk about balancing that spontaneity and discovery and intuition with the practicing of the skill.
Right, okay. I think the skill is in the improvisation. So I think being able to flow in the direction that the tree wants you to go in and landing on your feet is really the whole game. That's being good at it really comes down to that. So there's always improv. Having a really ironclad plan is just a rookie move. It's just not how you can go into it. So you're going to know that you're going to just run off the plan and you're going to be off out there on your own and you're just going to have to figure it out. And I know that now, and which is why my drawings look the way that they do. And so skill really comes out of an admission of having to improvise and doing so with a level of grace after you've done it for a while, I guess. Yes?
Could you talk just a little bit about your, like, the process of going from your studio in the Pacific Northwest to being in the Smithsonian? Like, how did that happen for you?
Right, how'd that happen? How that happened was I had a show here that got seen by people from the Smithsonian that became interested in my work, and I didn't know that for a while, and then when they approached me to acquiring a piece, it was already sold, and I thought, that's unfortunate. I won't be in the Smithsonian. But then they asked about another one, which was really lucky. And the one that they asked about was one that was at the bottom of a soggy wood pile that I carved. And so they, the process for the Smithsonian is they fly it to DC, they fly the piece to DC, and then they wait until all of the people that make the decisions are able to be in a room walking around the piece to see if they want to acquire it, and that takes a long time because they're all super busy. And then they decide, so I had to dangle for a while as to whether or not they would buy it. And then they told me that they would, and that was great. And then they told me that they were worried that the piece was full of bugs. And so they wrapped it in plastic and put it in a refrigerator for 3 months. And then they made this incredible stand for it, and we had a party. It was great. So that's how it happened. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. It was great. Yeah.